The rolling green hills stretched endlessly toward the horizon, dotted with the occasional farmhouse and those old oak trees that had stood sentinel over this small town long before I was born. Everything was as it should be. Everything was in its place. The morning paper sat folded on the side table. The clock on the mantel ticked its steady rhythm. The world turned as it always had. Before I walk you through this story, tell me your name, the city you're watching from, and what time it is for you. It was supposed to be an ordinary morning, the kind of morning I'd grown accustomed to in my 76 years on this earth. The sun was creeping through the Venetian blinds of our living room, casting those familiar golden stripes across the hardwood floor that Martha and I had picked out together nearly 40 years ago. I was sitting in my favorite chair, the leather one that's molded itself in my body over the decades, the one Martha always threatened to throw out, but never did, sipping my coffee. Black, 2 sugars. The same way I'd taken it since I was a young man, working my first management job at the textile factory. But then the phone rang, and with that single sound, everything I thought I knew about my life began to unravel like a ball of yarn rolling down a steep hill, picking up speed impossible to stop. I remember reaching for the receiver, expecting maybe a call from the hospital about our son David, or perhaps one of the neighbors checking in. The phone felt heavier than usual in my hand, though I couldn't have known why at the time. Sometimes, I think we sense these things, these moments when the universe is about to shift beneath our feet, even before we consciously understand what's happening. Mr. Thompson? The voice on the other end was young, nervous, male, unfamiliar. Yes, this is George Thompson, I replied, my voice carrying that automatic authority I developed over decades of managing people, solving problems, keeping operations running smoothly. Sir, this is David Chun from the Riverside Hotel downtown. I'm the night manager, and I'm very sorry to have to make this call, but there's been a situation involving your wife. The world stopped. I mean that quite literally. The clock stopped ticking. The coffee stopped steaming. The sunlight stopped moving across the floor. Everything froze in that infinite moment between what I knew to be true and what I was about to learn. What do you mean, a situation? My voice was calm, controlled. Years of crisis management had taught me to never let emotion interfere with gathering information. First, you understand the problem. Then you react. The young man cleared his throat. I could hear the discomfort bleeding through the phone line. Sir, your wife checked in with another man yesterday afternoon. They're registered in one of our suites. I found your contact information in our system because your credit card is on file from a previous day, and I thought you should know. I'm terribly sorry. The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Your wife checked in with another man. The sentence played over and over in my mind, each repetition making it somehow less real and more devastating simultaneously. My hand, I noticed it then, was trembling, just slightly, but trembling nonetheless. These hands had steady machinery worth millions of dollars, that had signed 1,000-page contracts without a second thought, that held Martha on our wedding day and never let go. These hands were shaking. That's impossible, I heard myself say. My wife is at County General Hospital. Our son is sick. She's been there for 3 days straight. Even as I spoke the words, I knew how they sounded. How many times had I heard similar protestations during my career? How many times had I sat across from someone who was confronting an uncomfortable truth they desperately wanted to deny? Sir, the young man's voice was gentle now, almost pitiful. I understand this is difficult, but I have the registration right here in front of me. Martha Thompson. Checked in yesterday at 2:47 p.m., accompanied by a male guest. They requested a suite with a view. They ordered room service for dinner. Sir, I really think you should come down to the hotel. Please, he added, and I could hear genuine concern in his voice now. Come to the reception right away. I sat there after hanging up the phone, the receiver still in my hand, the dial tone humming its monotonous song. The morning that had started so ordinary had transformed into something unrecognizable, something dark and twisted. It felt like I was watching my life from outside my body, like I was a character in someone else's story, and the plot had just taken a turn I couldn't have predicted. The hotel manager's voice echoed in my head. Please come to the reception right away. The urgency in those words, the discomfort, the pity, they all suggested this was real. This was happening. But how? How could Martha be in two places at once? How could a woman I'd loved for over 50 years, the woman who'd stood by me through lean times and good times, through the death of her parents and mine, through raising 3 children and burying one, how could that woman be checking into a hotel with another man? I felt the world shift beneath me, like the earth itself had tilted on its axis. Everything I thought I understood about my life, about our life together, suddenly seemed uncertain. The photographs on the walls, our wedding day, our children's graduations, that trip to the Grand Canyon for our 30th anniversary, they all stared back at me like evidence from a life I thought I'd lived but perhaps never really understood. I knew my wife. I knew Martha. Or did I? The question formed in my mind like a crack in a windshield, small at first but threatening to spread, to shatter everything. I had to find out the truth. I needed to understand what was happening. But I couldn't just storm down to that hotel in a rage. I couldn't confront the situation with emotion, clouding my judgment. No, I needed to be smart about this. I needed a plan. And so I sat there in my chair, the coffee growing cold in my cup, the morning light continuing its slow march across the floor, and I began to think, to strategize, to prepare myself for whatever truth was waiting for me at the Riverside Hotel. Let me tell you what happened next. The phone call had ended, but its impact reverberated through me like aftershocks from an earthquake. I placed the receiver back in its cradle with deliberate care, as if the simple act of doing something normal, something routine, might somehow restore order to a world that had suddenly tilted sideways. My hand was still trembling. I noticed it gripping the armrest of my chair, knuckles white with tension I hadn't consciously commanded. These hands, weathered and spotted with age now, but still strong, still capable, had built a life. They'd signed mortgage papers on this house. They'd changed diapers and tied shoelaces. They'd held Martha's hand through childbirth 3 times. They'd applauded at school plays and wiped away tears when our youngest, Sarah, had died in that car accident 20 years ago. And now these hands were shaking because a stranger on the phone had told me something that couldn't possibly be true. I looked around the living room, really looked at it, as if seeing it for the first time. The room was filled with evidence of our life together. Everywhere I turned, there were memories made solid, moments frozen in time. The burgundy sofa that Martha had. Spent 3 months selecting, visiting every furniture store within a 50-mile radius. The oak bookshelf I'd built myself one summer, its shelves now sagging slightly under the weight of decades of accumulated reading. The mantel clock that had belonged to Martha's grandfather, its brass pendulum swinging back and forth with hypnotic regularity. And the photographs. God, the photographs. They covered every available surface, marched along every wall. Our life together documented in 1,000 captured moments. There we were on our wedding day. I was 24. She was 22. Both of us so young, so impossibly young, with our whole lives stretching out before us like an unwritten book. Martha's dress had been her mother's, altered to fit her smaller frame. My suit was rented, but I'd felt like a millionaire wearing it. I stood up, my legs less steady than I would have liked, and walked to that photograph. I'd passed 1,000 times without really seeing it, but now I studied it like it might contain clues to a puzzle I was only beginning to understand I needed to solve. Martha's face in that photograph was radiant. That's the only word for it. Her dark hair was swept up in an elaborate style that must have taken hours to create, though I couldn't remember if her mother or a professional stylist had done it. Her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had captivated me from the moment I first saw her at the church social, sparkled with joy and hope and absolute certainty about our future together. And me? I looked confident, young, sure of myself in that way only the young can be. When you haven't yet learned how much of life is beyond your control, how quickly certainty can dissolve into confusion. I knew her. I whispered to the photograph, to myself, to the empty room. I know her better than anyone. But did I? The question wormed its way back into my consciousness, like an unwelcome guest who refuses to leave. I moved to another photograph. This one showed us at the hospital. the day David was born, our first child. Martha looked exhausted but ecstatic, cradling that tiny bundle against her chest. I stood beside the bed, one hand on her shoulder, wearing scrubs I'd been given in the delivery room. We both looked overwhelmed and overjoyed in equal measure. Then another photo. The four of us, Martha, me, David, and Jennifer, at Yellowstone National Park. That had been, 15 years ago now, before Sarah died. Before life got complicated in ways we couldn't have imagined. Before age started taking its toll. Before hospital stays became routine. Before every phone call carried the potential for bad news. I kept moving along the wall, a chronological journey through our decades together. Birthday parties and Christmases. Graduations and anniversaries. The time we'd gone to Niagara Falls for our 25th. The weekend we'd spent in Boston visiting Jennifer and her new husband. That 4th of July when Sarah, still alive then, still laughing, still lighting up every room she entered, had organized a family reunion in the backyard, and we'd taken that photo with all 3 kids, their spouses, and the first 2 grandchildren. Every image told a story. Every moment captured was a thread in the tapestry of our shared life. And that tapestry had seemed so strong, so complete, so impervious to the kind of tear that the hotel manager's phone call threatened to create. But something didn't feel right now. I tried to pinpoint when the feeling had started, this sense of unease that I'd been pushing down, refusing to acknowledge. Had it been there all along, lurking in the shadows of our relationship, or was I retrofitting my memories with suspicion that hadn't existed until 30 minutes ago? Was it possible? The thought crept in like winter cold through a crack in the door. Was it possible that Martha had been seeing someone else? That while I thought we were living one story, she had been living another entirely. My mind raced with possibilities, each one more painful than the last. I thought about the late-night phone calls she sometimes took in the other room. She'd always said it was Jennifer checking in, or one of her friends from the church auxiliary committee. I'd never questioned it, because why would I? We trusted each other. That was the foundation. Everything else was built on. Or I thought about the afternoons she'd spend running errands that seemed to take longer than they should. The shopping trips that came back with surprisingly few bags. The doctor's appointments that she'd gone to alone, even though I'd offered to drive her. Were these clues I'd been too blind to see? Or was I letting one phone call poison every memory, cast suspicion on every innocent moment? I walked back to my chair and sank into it, suddenly feeling every one of my 76 years. My knees ached. My back was stiff. The morning that had started with such comfortable routine now felt like it belonged to another lifetime entirely. I thought about Martha at the hospital with David. I'd been there myself just yesterday morning before coming home to rest. David had contracted pneumonia. At his age, nothing to dismiss lightly, but the doctor said he'd be fine with treatment and time. Martha had insisted on staying with him, setting up camp in the uncomfortable chair beside his bed the way she had when the kids were young and sick. "You go home and rest," she told me yesterday. "You know the doctors don't want both of us hovering. David needs his sleep, and so do you. I'll call if anything changes." It had seemed so reasonable. So Martha. She'd always been a caretaker, the one who put everyone else's needs before her own. I'd kissed her forehead and left, grateful for the chance to sleep in my own bed for a change. But according to the hotel manager, Martha hadn't been at the hospital yesterday afternoon. She'd been at the Riverside Hotel, checking in with another man, ordering room service, staying overnight. The contradictions didn't add up. They couldn't both be true. Either the hotel had made some terrible mistake, mixed up names or credit card or something, or Martha had lied to me, had been lying to me, was lying to me still. And if she'd lied about this, what else had she lied about? I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Not since those early years of marriage when we were still learning each other, still occasionally surprising each other in unpleasant ways. I felt the cold edge of doubt, the terrible uncertainty of not knowing whether the person you've given your life to is who you think they are. This wasn't just about catching a mistake. This wasn't just about verifying facts or correcting a simple misunderstanding. This was about the life I had built with Martha, the love we'd shared, the loyalty we'd pledged, The years we'd accumulated together like treasures in a vault. Everything we'd worked for, everything we'd survived, everything we'd become to each other over half a century. And now it all felt like it was slipping through my fingers like water, like sand, like time itself. Impossible to hold on to no matter how tightly I grasped. Could I really go on with investigating this? Could I really dig into the possibility that Martha had betrayed me, betrayed us, betrayed everything we'd built? Part of me wanted to ignore the phone call, to write it off as some bizarre mistake, to go back to the comfortable certainty of this morning, when I'd sat in this chair drinking my coffee and thinking about nothing more troubling than whether it might rain later. But I couldn't. The question had been planted, and like a seed in fertile soil, it would grow whether I wanted it to or not. The doubt would fester. The uncertainty would poison every interaction, every conversation, every quiet moment together. No, I had to know. I had to find out the truth, whatever it cost me. And that's when I made my decision. I wouldn't jump to conclusions. That way led to mistakes, to assumptions that could destroy what might still be saved. But I would confront this head on. I would investigate. I would gather the facts. I'd worked as a manager for decades. I knew how to handle tricky situations. I knew how to navigate difficult personnel issues, how to mediate disputes, how to uncover discrepancies in reports or accounts. I knew how to be methodical, how to be thorough, how to separate emotion from fact-finding. I would treat this like any other problem that needed solving. I would gather information. I would assess the situation. And then, only then, would I decide what to do with what I found. So I started my plan. A plan that would give me answers. A plan that would either prove the hotel manager wrong and restore my peace of mind, or prove him right. And, well, I couldn't think about that outcome yet. Not until I knew for certain. But the plan wouldn't be without its cost. I knew that much already. Because even if I found out this was all a mistake, even if I discovered some innocent explanation that made everything make sense again, something had already changed. The trust I'd taken for granted had been questioned. The certainty I'd lived with had been shaken. And some things, once broken, can never be quite the same again, no matter how carefully you piece them back together. I stood up from my chair with renewed purpose. My hands had stopped shaking. The trembling uncertainty had hardened into determined resolve. I grabbed my old leather jacket from the coat rack by the door, the one I'd bought in 1985, and refused to replace despite Martha's gentle suggestions that it had seen better days. I pulled on my boots, the sturdy ones I'd worn to work for years before I retired. I caught my reflection in the hall mirror as I reached for my car keys. I looked older than I felt. My hair, once dark like Martha's, had gone completely white. My face was lined with 7.5 decades of living. But my eyes still held the same determination they'd had when I was a young manager trying to prove myself, when I was a new father trying to provide for my family, when I was a grieving parent trying to hold together what was left after Sarah died. I wouldn't let this destroy me. I wouldn't let it destroy us. Not without understanding what had really happened. As I walked out the door into the late morning sun, heading toward my car parked in the driveway, I felt the weight of what I was about to do settle onto my shoulders. I was about to investigate my own wife. I was about to question the foundation of my entire life. I was about to risk everything I held dear in pursuit of truth. The drive through the quiet streets of our neighborhood felt surreal. I'd driven these roads thousands of times. To work, to the store, to church, to visit the kids. I knew every turn, every stop sign, every landmark. But today, everything looked different. The familiar had become strange. The comfortable had become unsettling. I passed the Johnson's house, where Martha and Mrs. Johnson spent hours working in their respective gardens, exchanging plants and gardening tips across the fence. I passed the park, where we'd taken the grandchildren to play countless times. I passed the library, where Martha volunteered 2 days a week, shelving books and helping the elderly patrons use the computers. This was our life, our community, our world, everything in its place, everything making sense. Except now, nothing made sense at all. The Riverside Hotel was downtown, about a 20-minute drive from our suburban home. It was one of the nicer establishments in our small town, not luxury by any means, but respectable. The kind of place where out-of-town business people stayed, or where families visiting relatives might book a room. Martha and I had actually stayed there once ourselves, about 5 years ago, when our house was being fumigated for termites. I remember that stay. We'd made the best of it, treating it like a mini vacation. Room service breakfast in bed. A leisurely afternoon, reading by the hotel pool. It had been pleasant, romantic even, in a quiet, comfortable way that came from decades of companionship. Had that stay been when our credit card got into their system? Was that how the hotel manager had my number to call me today? As I drove, I found myself running through scenarios in my mind, each one a different possibility, a different way this could play out. Scenario 1. The hotel had made a mistake. They confused Martha with someone else. There was another Martha Thompson, or they'd entered the wrong name into their system. When I arrived, I discovered the error, laugh about it with the embarrassed manager, and go home with a story to tell at dinner. Scenario 2. Martha was indeed at the hotel, but there was an innocent explanation. Maybe David had needed something from home, and she'd registered a room to store supplies. Maybe she'd needed a place to rest between hospital shifts, and the hotel was closer than our house. Maybe the other man was a doctor, a family friend, someone completely innocent. Scenario 3. The one I couldn't quite let myself fully contemplate. The one where everything I believed about my life was wrong. My heart was pounding as I pulled into the hotel parking lot. I'd driven here on autopilot, my mind so consumed with possibilities that I barely remembered the journey. Now, facing the building's brick facade, its tasteful awning, its revolving entrance door, I felt the full weight of what I was about to do. I was about to walk inside and potentially confirm that my wife had betrayed me, or I was about to discover a mistake, or something in between that I couldn't predict. I sat in the car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, engine still running. I could turn around. I could drive away. I could call the hotel and tell them I'd checked with Martha and there'd been some mix-up. But no, I'd come this far. I'd made my decision. I had to see this through. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was profound. I could hear my own breathing, heavy and deliberate. I could hear the tick of the cooling engine. I could hear the distant sound of traffic on the main road. I got out of the car and walked toward the entrance, each step feeling significant, like I was crossing from one life into another. The automatic doors slid open. The lobby was elegant in an understated way. Marble floors, comfortable seating areas, a large chandelier that probably wasn't crystal but looked expensive enough. And there, behind the reception desk, stood a young Asian man, who I assumed must be David Chun, the night manager who'd called me. He saw me approaching, and his face registered recognition and apprehension in equal measure. I walked up to the desk, my legs steady now, my resolve firm. I'd managed factories with hundreds of employees. I'd navigated corporate politics and union negotiations. I'd faced down auditors and inspectors and regulatory agencies. I could handle one conversation with one hotel manager. "Mr. Thompson?" he asked quietly as I reached the desk. "Yes. You called me this morning about my wife." He nodded, glancing around to make sure no other guests were in earshot. "Yes, sir. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, but I felt you had a right to know. Your wife checked in yesterday afternoon with a male companion. They're registered in room 412. He turned his computer monitor so I could see the registration. And there it was. Martha Thompson. Yesterday's date. Room 412. Suite with a king bed. Expected checkout tomorrow at noon. The evidence was right there in front of me. Black letters on a white background. Impossible to misunderstand. Impossible to explain away. I stared at that screen and I knew I wasn't dreaming. This wasn't a nightmare I'd wake up from, my heart racing, relieved to find Martha sleeping peacefully beside me. This was real. This was happening. I had to confront Martha. I had to understand what this meant. But how could I do that without destroying everything? How could I ask the questions that needed asking without shattering the life we'd built together? Can you tell me? I started, then had to clear my throat. Can you tell me anything else? About the man she was with? About what they've been doing? David Chin looked uncomfortable, but he nodded. The gentleman with her appeared to be in his late 60s or early 70s. They seemed comfortable together. They had dinner sent to the room last night. Champagne, 2 steaks, chocolate dessert. This morning they ordered breakfast. Coffee and pastries. Each detail felt like a physical blow. Champagne, chocolate, breakfast. These weren't the activities of someone storing hospital supplies. These were the activities of a couple, a romantic couple. Are they in the room now? I asked. I believe so, yes. At least, they haven't checked out, and I haven't seen them leave. I stood there at the reception desk, feeling like I was standing at a crossroads. I could go up to that room right now. I could knock on the door. I could confront whatever was behind it. Or I could walk away, try to process this, try to figure out what to do with this information before taking any action I couldn't undo. Thank you, I heard myself say. I appreciate you calling me. I'm very sorry, Mr. Thompson. I know this must be incredibly difficult. I nodded and turned away from the desk, walking back toward the lobby entrance on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Behind me, I could feel David Chen's sympathetic gaze following me. Poor old man, he was probably thinking. Poor betrayed husband. I made it to my car before the full emotional impact hit me. I sat in the driver's seat, hands on the wheel again, staring at nothing. The hotel building loomed in my peripheral vision, containing my wife and another man in room 412. This wasn't just about catching a mistake anymore. This was about the life I had built with Martha. Every year, every day, every moment of our 50-plus years together. The vows we'd exchanged, the promises we'd made, the trust we'd built, all of it hanging in the balance now, threatened by whatever was happening in that hotel room. And the love. God, the love. I'd loved Martha since I was barely more than a boy. She'd been my first real girlfriend, my only wife, my partner in everything. We'd grown up together, grown old together. We'd raised children and buried a child. We'd celebrated victories and weathered defeats. We'd learned each other's rhythms, each other's moods, each other's souls. Or at least I thought we had. Could I really go on with this plan? Could I really dig deeper, seek more answers, potentially uncover more painful truths? Knowing that every new piece of information might be another nail in the coffin of our marriage? The weight of the situation pressed down on me like a physical thing. My chest felt tight. My breathing was shallow. I realized with some distant part of my mind that I might be having a panic attack. Something I'd never experienced in my life, not even during the worst crises at work or the most terrible moments with Sarah's death. This was different. This was personal in a way nothing else had ever been. This struck at the very core of who I was, who I thought I was, who I'd built my entire life around being. I sat there in that parking lot, looking older than my 76 years, feeling the full crushing weight of betrayal and uncertainty and fear. Not fear of being alone, though that was part of it, but fear that everything I believed about my life had been a comfortable lie. What do you do when the foundation of your existence cracks? When the person you trusted most in the world might not be trustworthy? When the story you've been telling yourself about your life might be fiction? I didn't have answers. Not yet, but I knew I couldn't leave things like this. I couldn't pretend I hadn't received that phone call, hadn't seen that registration, hadn't confirmed that Martha was indeed in that hotel with another man while I thought she was at the hospital with our son. I needed more information. I needed to understand. And then, only then, could I decide what to do next. I started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. But I didn't head home. Instead, I drove to County General Hospital, where Martha had supposedly been staying with David for the past 3 days, where I'd left her yesterday morning, thinking I was leaving her to care for our son. The drive took 15 minutes. 15 minutes of my mind racing through memories, trying to identify the moment when things had gone wrong. Had there been a moment? Or had this been building slowly, imperceptibly, like erosion wearing away rock, until one day there's suddenly a chasm where solid ground used to be? I parked in the hospital lot and walked through the familiar automatic doors into the Too Bright lobby. I'd been here so many times. When each of our children was born, when Martha had her gallbladder removed, when we'd sat in the emergency room after Sarah's accident, learning that she hadn't survived. When my own father had died here, and then Martha's mother, this hospital held so many memories, so many crucial moments in our family history. And now I was here to verify whether my wife had been lying to me. I took the elevator to the 4th floor, where David was being treated. I walked down the sterile hallways, past the nurse's station, toward his room. My heart was pounding. What would I find? An empty chair where Martha should have been? Or would she be there, making all this somehow more confusing, more impossible to understand? I reached David's room and looked through the small window in the door before entering. David was there, sleeping peacefully and full in his arm, and in the chair beside his bed, Jennifer, our daughter, not Martha. I pushed open the door as quietly as I could. Jennifer looked up from the book she'd been reading, her face showing surprise. "Dad? I didn't expect you. Mom said you'd gone home to rest." "Jennifer," I said, keeping my voice low to avoid waking David. "Where's your mother?" "She had to leave yesterday afternoon. Remember? She said she had an appointment she couldn't miss, and she asked if I could come sit with David for a while. She said she'd be back this morning, but then she called and said she needed a little more time, so I stayed." The world tilted again. An appointment she couldn't miss. Of course. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture I didn't want to see but couldn't look away from. What appointment? I asked, though I already knew Jennifer wouldn't have the answer. She didn't say. I assumed it was medical. You know, Mom, she never wants to worry us about her own health issues. "Is everything okay, Dad? You look pale." I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack from the effort. "Everything's fine, sweetheart. Just checking in. You take care of your brother, and I'll be in touch soon." I left before Jennifer could ask more questions, before the expression on my face could give away the turmoil inside me. I walked back down those sterile hallways, back into the elevator, back through the lobby, moving on autopilot while my mind processed what I just learned. Martha had lied to me. Directly, deliberately lied. She'd told me she'd be at the hospital with David, had used our sick son as cover for whatever she was doing at that hotel. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was conscious deception. The betrayal cut deeper than I'd imagined possible. It wasn't just that she might be having an affair, though that was devastating enough. It was that she'd looked me in the eye and lied. She'd used David's illness, had manipulated me and Jennifer both to create the time and space for her hotel rendezvous. How long had this been going on? How many other appointments had there been? How many times had I believed her without question, trusting her the way a husband of 50 years should be able to trust his wife? I made it back to my car before the anger hit. Pure, white-hot rage that made my hand shake again, but for different reasons than before. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive back to that hotel and confront her right now. Damn the consequences. But no, I couldn't act on anger. I'd learned that lesson decades ago in my career. Decisions made in the heat of emotion were almost always wrong. I needed to think. I needed to plan. I needed to decide what I wanted to accomplish before I took any action. Did I want to save our marriage? Did I want revenge? Did I want understanding? Did I want to walk away? I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. So instead of going back to the hotel or going home, I drove to the park where Martha and I used to take our kids when they were young. There was a bench there under an old maple tree where we'd sat countless times watching David and Jennifer and Sarah play on the swings and slides. I sat on that bench now, alone, the playground empty on this weekday morning. The swings moved gently in the breeze, their chains creaking softly. Autumn leaves scattered across the wood chips. Everything was quiet, peaceful, normal, and I reflected on my life, on the choices I'd made, the paths I'd taken, on the young man I'd been when I first met Martha at that church social, so confident that I knew what I wanted, on the husband and father I'd tried to be through all the years, on the manager who'd solved problems and built systems and fixed what was broken. But how do you fix this? How do you repair trust once it's been shattered? How do you rebuild a foundation that's crumbled beneath you? I thought about all those photographs on our walls at home. All those captured moments of joy and love and family. Were any of them real? Or had I been living in a fantasy? Seeing what I want to see while Martha lives some other life I've been blind to? The questions multiplied in my mind like cells dividing. Each answer led to more questions. Each revelation opened new chasms of uncertainty. I sat on that bench for over an hour, watching the autumn light change as the sun climbed higher in the sky. I thought about Martha, about us, about what we'd been and what we might still be, about whether love could survive this kind of breach. And just as I was beginning to think I might sit there forever, unable to make a decision, unable to move forward or backward, my phone rang. I pulled it from my pocket with trembling hands. The screen showed Martha's name. My heart skipped a beat. This was it, another moment of truth in a day that seemed to be full of them. I stared at her name on the screen, her contact photo showing her smiling at last year's Christmas dinner, and I felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost knocked me off the bench. Love and anger, betrayal and longing, certainty and confusion, all of it tangled together, impossible to separate. I answered the call. George. Her voice sounded normal, unchanged, exactly as it always had. George, I need to tell you something. You won't believe what happened. I waited, silent, letting her speak. David's doing so much better. The antibiotics are really working. But listen, something crazy happened yesterday, and I need to explain before you hear about it from someone else. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought she might be able to hear it through the phone. I got a call from the Riverside Hotel, she continued. Apparently, someone used my credit card information to check into a room. Identity theft, can you believe it? The fraud department from the bank called me, and I had to go down there to file a police report and sort everything out. I was so embarrassed, having to deal with all of that while David's in the hospital, but Jennifer came to sit with him so I could take care of it. She paused, and I could hear her breathing, could picture her sitting somewhere, maybe in a hotel room, maybe somewhere else, telling me this story. George, are you there? Say something. I know it's crazy, but that's what happened. Someone stole my identity and checked into that hotel using my information. I listened to her voice, that familiar voice that I'd heard speak my name 1,000,000 times in 1,000,000 different situations. I listened to the words, the explanation that was so neat, so convenient, so perfectly designed to explain away everything without raising more questions. And I had a choice to make. I could believe her. I could accept this explanation and let everything go back to normal. I could choose to trust, to take her at her word the way I had for 50 years. Or I could confront her with what I knew, that she'd been at that hotel, that the registration was real, that she'd lied to me and Jennifer both. But there was a third option, too, one that I hadn't fully considered until this moment. I could dig deeper. I could investigate further. I could gather more information before making any irreversible decisions. Martha, I said finally, my voice steady despite the chaos inside me. That sounds terrible. You must have been so stressed dealing with that on top of everything with David. Oh, I was, she said, relief evident in her voice. But it's all sorted now. The bank is canceling that card and issuing me a new one. And the hotel was very understanding. They're actually the ones who noticed something wasn't right and contacted the bank. The lie was so smooth, so practiced. Or was it the truth? Could I really be sure? When are you coming home? I asked. Soon. Jennifer's going to stay with David for a few more hours, and then I'll head back. I'm exhausted, George. I just want to come home and sleep in our bed and forget this whole mess ever happened. Our bed, the bed we'd shared for 5 decades. The thought of lying next to her tonight, knowing what I knew or thought I knew, made my stomach turn. Take your time, I said. Make sure David's okay first. I'll be here when you're ready. We said our goodbyes, and I ended the call. I sat there on the park bench, phone in my hand, staring at her contact photo. What she'd said next had left me speechless because it meant one of two things. Either she was telling the truth, and I'd been preparing to destroy our marriage over a case of identity theft, or she was lying so expertly that she could look me in the eye, metaphorically over phone and deceived me without hesitation. I didn't know which was worse. I had a choice to make now, a bigger choice than I'd faced all day. What I found out today had changed me forever, regardless of what the actual truth turned out to be. The seeds of doubt had been planted, and even if they turned out to be unfounded, they'd already taken root in my mind. Would I accept what happened? Would I choose to believe Martha's explanation and move forward? Would I do what I'd always done? Fight for my family, protect what we'd built together, preserve the life we created? Or would I keep investigating, keep questioning, keep pulling at threads until either everything unraveled or the truth revealed itself completely? I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The phone call from the hotel manager, the registration with Martha's name, Jennifer sitting with David instead of Martha, the lie about the appointment, and now the story about identity theft, so convenient, so perfect. And I thought about the alternative, that maybe, just maybe, Martha was telling the truth, that some cruel coincidence had put her name in that hotel system, that someone really had stolen her credit card information, that all of this was a terrible misunderstanding that I was making worse with my suspicions. I couldn't know, not for certain, not without more information, more investigation, more truth-seeking that might destroy the very thing I was trying to save. The autumn sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. The day was slipping away, time marching forward, whether I was ready or not. Soon Martha would come home. We'd sit across from each other at dinner. We'd go through our evening routine. We'd get ready for bed. And I'd have to decide whether to pretend everything was normal or confront her with my doubts. I stood up from the bench, my knees protesting after sitting for so long. I walked back to my car, my footsteps crunching on fallen leaves. I got behind the wheel, but didn't start the engine immediately. Everything in my life had led to this moment. Every decision I'd made, every challenge I'd faced, every problem I'd solved, all of it had prepared me for this choice that I now had to make. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unknow what I'd learned today. The phone call had happened. The registration was real. The lie or the misunderstanding had been spoken. Whatever innocence or ignorance I'd possessed this morning was gone forever. What I did next would determine not just the fate of my marriage, but the kind of man I was, the kind of man I wanted to be in whatever time I had left. Would I be the man who trusted despite doubt, or the man who demanded absolute certainty, even if it destroyed everything? Would I fight for my family by believing the best, or fight for my family by uncovering the worst? I sat in that car, hands on the wheel, engine silent, and I made my decision. But what that decision was, well, that's a story for another time. Because the truth is, I'm still not sure I made the right choice. I'm still not sure there was a right choice to be made. All I know is that everything changed that day. The phone call, the hotel, the lies of truth, or whatever they were, they changed me, changed us, changed everything. And now I have to live with the consequences of what I decided in that moment. We both do. Trust me when I say you won't want to miss what happened next. Because the ending to this story, the ending is something I never could have predicted, even with all my years of experience solving problems and managing crises. Sometimes life presents you with situations that don't have solutions, only consequences. Sometimes the mystery isn't what happened, but what it means. Sometimes the truth you find isn't the truth you were looking for. And sometimes the hardest thing to figure out isn't what your partner did or didn't do. It's who you are when faced with uncertainty, who you become when you can't be sure, who you choose to be when trust itself becomes the question rather than the answer. I'm still figuring that out. Even now, even after everything that came next. But I can tell you this, whatever you think happened, whatever you've assumed about Martha and me in that hotel room, you're probably wrong. The truth was stranger, sadder, and more complicated than I ever imagined. And it started with one simple decision I made, sitting in that car on that autumn day, with the whole world hanging in the balance. I can see that the story shifts something in you. For you to have come thus far, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment below, what would you have done in my shoes? Let me know where you're watching from, and stay tuned for the next part of the story.